Hello, 3C. It's me. I'm back, and I'm going to read to you today Chapter 9 from Animal Farm. Um, but before I do that, I want to talk about the next few weeks. Tomorrow, I have a meeting with the teachers, the English teachers, so we're going to talk about what the plan is for the Animal Farm assessment, whether or not, if school goes back after on May 6th and sort of we're able to start doing some assessment, then you will have a test for Animal Farm at school, just like you normally would. But if school does not go back as normal on May the 6th, then we're going to have to find some other way to assess you for Animal Farm, and we just don't really know what that's going to look like yet. So tomorrow I'm going to have a meeting and we're going to talk about all the year levels and sort of make plans for various different possible things that could happen in the future, because we just really don't know. If I had to bet on it, I would say we won't be going back to school like as normal on May the 6th, though there may be an opportunity for some limited school attendance again if the numbers have really dropped. So we really just do not know what it's going to look like on May the 6th yet. So we're going to be planning for those contingencies tomorrow. We have 2 more chapters left of Animal Farm, as obviously Chapter 9 is what we're going to do today. I'm going to read it to you on this video. Chapter 10, I'm going to do a Big Blue Button video class. So you can actually talk to me and ask me questions. I'm going to read you the last chapter on that lesson, and then and we can actually just sort of reconnect maybe a little bit, because I haven't been able to see any of you for such a long time. So that's the plan for, so today's lesson's Thursday, so I'm talking about next Thursday because of course Monday is Easter Monday, so we will not have a lesson on Easter Monday, because you won't have any lessons on Easter Monday because it's a school-free day. So today is Thursday, we're doing Chapter 9, video lesson. Next Thursday we're going to have a scheduled Big Blue Button lesson altogether at 11:20, our usual class time. Okay, but today we're doing Chapter 9, and I'm going to read it to you. This is, the climax of the story, in the sense of it's the most dramatic chapter. It's a really, really sad chapter. For those of you that have already read it, you know what I'm talking about, but I'm just going to dive in it and give you the sad reality of what happens in Chapter 9. It's not a cheerful chapter. Chapter 9. Boxer's split hoof was a long time in healing. They had started the rebuilding of the windmill the day after the victory celebrations were ended. Boxer refused to take even a day off work, and made it a point of honour not to let it be seen that he was in pain. In the evenings he would admit privately to Clover that the hoof troubled him a great deal. Clover treated the hoof with poultices of herbs which she prepared by chewing them, and both she and Benjamin urged Boxer to work less hard. A horse's lungs do not last forever, she had said to him. But Boxer would not listen. He had, he said, only one real ambition left, to see the windmill well under way before he reached the age for retirement. Boxer is blindly believes that he is going to retire when he's 12, as was promised at the beginning of the revolution. And he really thinks that that's going to happen, that he's going to be able to stop working when he's 12. Let's see if that's what occurs. At the beginning, when the laws of Animal Farm were first formulated, the retiring age had been fixed for horses and pigs at 12, the cows at 14, dogs at 9, for sheep at 7, and for hens and geese at 5. Liberal old age pensions had been agreed upon. As yet, no animal had actually retired on pension, but of late the subject had been discussed more and more. Now that the small field beyond the orchard had been set aside for barley, it was rumoured that a corner of the large pasture was to be fenced off and turned into a grazing ground for superannuated animals. For a horse, it was said, the pension would be 5 pounds of corn a day, and in winter 15 pounds of hay, with a carrot or possibly an apple on public holidays. Boxer's 12th birthday was due in the late summer of the following year. Meanwhile, life was hard. The winter was as cold as the last one had been, and food was even shorter. Once again, all rations were reduced except those of the pigs and the dogs. A too rigid equality in rations, Squealer explained, would have been contrary to the principles of animalism. Okay, so of course here Schooler is once again lying, manufacturing, constructing a version of animalism that is convenient to the pigs and the dogs, and it justifies the lack of equality, the fact that food is not being given to the animals equally. We saw this also in communist Russia, post-revolutionary Russia, wherein increasingly over time, the wealthy few, the communist leadership and their families, got more and more stuff, and the average everyday person was left to starve and to struggle in poverty. So this is a direct comparison to what happened in Russia under Stalin. In any case, he had no difficulty in proving to the other animals that they were not in reality short of food, whatever the appearances might be. For the time being, certainly, it had been found necessary to make a readjustment of rations. Squealer always spoke of it as a readjustment, never as a reduction. But in comparison with the days of Jones, the improvement was enormous. Again, manipulating the facts, manipulating numbers, and Squealer uses his gift with language to manipulate the animals. He uses his intelligence to manipulate the animals. So using language to rewrite history, and the animals are just, the average everyday animal is just not capable of sort of speaking back to Squealer when he's speaking in this very political way. Reading out the figures in a shrill, rapid voice, he proved to them in detail that they had more oats, more hay, more turnips than they had had in Jones's day, that they worked shorter hours, that their drinking water was of better quality, that they lived longer, that a larger proportion of their young ones survived infancy, and that they had more straw in their stalls and suffered less from fleas. The animals believed every word of it. Truth to tell, Jones and all he stood for had almost faded out of their memories. They knew that life nowadays was harsh and bare, that they were often hungry and often cold, and that they were usually working when they were not asleep. But doubtless it had been worse in the old days. They were glad to believe so. Besides, in those days they had been slaves, and now they were free, and that made all the difference, as Squealer did not fail to point out. Words and creating these differences between the idea of being a slave and being free, practically speaking, on a day-to-day level, their lives are exactly the same. Perhaps the only difference is that their offspring are not being sold, and they're not sort of being slaughtered for food and things like that. So the only thing that's really different is that the animals are no longer being sold. So that's the only one positive change that exists still, because the pigs have essentially just replaced Jones, right? They get more stuff, they live in luxury, they don't work very hard, and the animals are just as cold, just as hungry, and working just as hard as they always have. But they don't want to believe it. It's almost too devastating a fact to look it in the face. So it's actually easier and nicer for them to just imagine and hope and believe that things are actually better, even though deep down, many of them, particularly the smarter ones like Benjamin and Clover, know that it's not the case. There were many more mouths to feed now. In the autumn, the 4 sows had all littered about simultaneously, producing 31 pigs between them. To litter means to get, like when I'm talking about animals like pigs, means to give birth. So you have a litter of pigs or a litter of dogs, and it's usually like 6 or 8. So it's just talking about how the 4 sows, so that's the name of a female pig, have given birth to a number of baby pigs each. The young pigs were piebald, and as Napoleon was the only boar on the farm, it was possible to guess at their parentage. It was announced that later, when bricks and timber had been purchased, a schoolroom would be built in the farmhouse gardens. For the time being, the young pigs were given their instruction by Napoleon himself in the farmhouse kitchen. They took their exercise in the garden and were discouraged from playing with the other young animals. Okay, so you see here we're getting a class structure and system in place. Only the young pigs are getting access to education. The other animals are not. And also, the young pigs are being growing up thinking that they're superior to the other animals, and they're not being allowed to play with the other animals. And of course, if they were allowed to play with the other animals, they would make friends with them, make connections with them, and it would be more difficult for the older pigs to convince the younger pigs that that the other animals are not worthy of their time. So it's sort of separating the classes. You might compare it to really, really expensive private schools, and parents that don't want their children to play with the wrong sort of other child. So it's that sort of class structure stuff that we see these days as well. Okay, let's keep reading. About this time, too, it was laid down as a rule that when a pig and any other animal met on the path, the other animal must stand aside, and also that all pigs, of whatever degree, would have the privilege of wearing green ribbons on their tails on Sundays. Okay, so anyone who remembers Molly and the controversy around her getting to wear ribbons will see the hypocrisy around the idea of the pigs getting to wear ribbons. And of course, the idea that other animals need to get off the road and make way for the pigs. We see a very hierarchical, structured society in place here, wherein the pigs are completely and utterly dominant. You remember back to when Napoleon was first gaining power, those 4 pigs that he executed. Those pigs were tried to stand up against him because they remembered what old Major had said, and they remembered that all pigs were supposed to be equal. Now these new generations of pigs are coming through. Napoleon is teaching them his ideas. And so there's never going to be pigs anymore that actually stand up against Napoleon, because they're all being raised by him and brainwashed by him to believe that pigs are superior, as opposed to the reality of the situation, which old Major was trying to teach, that all animals should be treated equally. The farm had had a fairly successful year, but was still short of money. There were the bricks, sand and lime for the schoolroom to be purchased, and would also be necessary to begin saving up again for the machinery for the windmill. Then there were lamp oil and candles for the house, sugar for Napoleon's own table. He forbade this to the other pigs on the ground that it made them fat. And all the usual placements, such as tools, nails, string, coal, wire, scrap iron, and dog biscuits. A stump of hay and part of the potato crop were sold off, and the contract for eggs was increased to 600 a week, so that year the hens barely hatched enough chicks to keep their numbers at the same level. For you guys, sorry. Of course, you remember the hens were not supposed to be having to sell any of their eggs at the beginning of the revolution, and now so many eggs are being sold that they're barely able to have enough children to keep their population at a level wherein they can sort of keep producing the same amount of eggs. Okay. Rations reduced in December were reduced again in February, and lanterns in the stores were forbidden to save oil. But the pigs seemed comfortable enough, and in fact were putting on weight, if anything. One afternoon in late February, a warm, rich, appetizing scent, such as the animals had never smelt before, wafted itself across the yard from the little brew house, which had been disused in Jones's time, and which stood beyond the kitchen. Someone said it was the smell of cooking barley. The animals sniffed the air more hungrily and wondered whether a warm mash was being prepared for their supper. But no warm mash appeared, and on the following Sunday it was announced that from now onwards all barley would be reserved for the pigs. The field beyond the orchard had already been sown with barley, and the news soon leaked out that every pig was now receiving a ration of a pint of beer daily, with half a gallon for Napoleon himself, which was always served to him in the Crown Derby soup tureen. So Napoleon is using the fancy cutlery and the fancy plates and silverware that was left behind from Jones's time. So you see the pigs are all a step above the other animals, but then Napoleon is above them. So he reserves to himself some special treats, like he's the only one who gets sugar, he gets extra alcohol, but every pig is getting beer. And of course you remember back to the commandments, obviously no animal shall drink alcohol was one of these 7 commandments, but that has long since been forgotten. But if there were hardships to be borne, they were partly offset by the fact that life nowadays had a greater dignity than it had had before. There were more songs, more speeches, more processions. Napoleon had commanded that once a week there should be held something called a spontaneous demonstration, the object of which was to celebrate the struggles and triumphs of Animal Farm. Okay, if you're scheduling something and calling it a spontaneous demonstration, it's obviously not spontaneous, so there's an irony there. And these events to sort of celebrate Napoleon, celebrate, what animalism has become, singing songs and marching about. These are all designed to distract the population from the reality of their situation. So this happened in post-revolutionary Russia as well. There was always parades and military processions and all this stuff that's designed to distract the population from what's really going on. So this is a direct comparison to revolutionary Russia, or Stalinist Russia, I should say. Okay. At the appointed time, the animals would leave their work and march around the precincts of the farm in military formation, with the pigs leading, then the horses, then the cows, then the sheep, and then the poultry. The dogs flanked the procession, and at the head of all marched Napoleon's black cockerel. Boxer and Clover always carried between them a green banner marked with the hoof and horn and the caption, "Long live Comrade Napoleon." Afterwards, there were recitations of poems composed in Napoleon's honour, and a speech by Squealer giving particulars of the latest increases in the productions of foodstuff, and on occasion a shot was fired from the gun. The sheep were the greatest devotees of the spontaneous demonstration, and if anyone complained, as a few animals sometimes did, when no pigs or dogs were near, that they wasted time and meant a lot of standing about in the cold, the sheep was sure to silence him with a tremendous bleating of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. But by and large the animals enjoyed these celebrations. They found it comforting to be reminded that, after all, they were truly their own masters, and that the work they did was for their own benefit. Of course, there's all this irony, all this you've got to read between the lines here. We know that the animals are not their own masters, and that the work they're doing is not for their own benefit, it's for the benefit of the pigs. They are just as hungry, just as tired, just as cold as they've ever been. Their lives are not being made better. So that, what with the songs, the processions, Squealer's lists of figures, the thunder of the gun, the crowing of the cockerel, and the fluttering of the flag, they were able to forget that their bellies were empty, at least part of the time. I forgot this. Oh, there we go. Yeah, okay. I'm going to have to... Yes, make sure I don't talk too long. In April, Animal Farm was proclaimed a republic, and it became necessary to elect a president. There was only one candidate, Napoleon, who was elected unanimously. On the same day, it was given out that fresh documents had been discovered which revealed further details about Snowball's complicity with Jones. Okay, so we have fake elections. These happen all over the world, even now. It's still in Russia, like Putin, there's supposed to be an election that was cancelled for coronavirus. But, of course Putin's going to ring. There's never a question. So you have these sort of faux democracy ideas, and you see this all around the world, wherein it's supposed to be an election, but the same dude gets elected, year after year, and he's in power for what feels like a century, yeah. So it happens all the time. It now appeared that Snowball had not, as the animals had previously imagined, merely attempted to lose the Battle of the Cowship by means of a stratagem, but had openly been fighting on Jones's side. In fact, it was he who had actually been the leader of the human forces, and had charged into battle with the words "Long live humanity" on his lips. The wounds on Snowball's back, which a few of the animals still remembered to have seen, had been inflicted by Napoleon's teeth. Okay, so this is yet another example of the rewriting of history, and you might think it's a bit strange that these animals sort of just believe these things, but we see this all the time. People often believe what they're told, particularly by a leader that they like and trust. So, for example, we're seeing this all the time among the supporters of Donald Trump in America. He'll say something, it'll turn out to be wrong, or something that's not smart for him to have said, and he'll just say he didn't say it. And his people, his supporters, just sort of believe whatever the latest thing is that he says. And whether or not they actually remember hearing him say, for example, coronavirus is just like a flu, it'll be over by by April, whereas obviously we're now, it hasn't even hit its peak in America yet. They just sort of conveniently forget things. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening here. They want to believe Napoleon. They want to trust him, and so it's possible for them to sort of rewrite the history in their own brains. Don't just think that this is something that happens in Animal Farm. Humans do this all the time. So you've really got to sort of be attentive and critical about your own opinions, what you remember people saying, how things really happen, and make sure that that your political leaders are not rewriting history in a way that's convenient to them. Okay, we're about to have the return of a character who we haven't seen since the first few chapters. You'll remember that Moses the Raven represents religion. Um, in Russia after World War II, Stalinist Russia, when people were starting to expect that when the average worker, the average Russian was starting to expect that, their lives should be getting better. They should be getting some reward for all the work they've been putting in over the years, and they weren't. Stalin allowed the Russian Orthodox Church to return and to start giving services again that had been prohibited during the early years of the revolution and during Lenin's time and during the beginning of Stalin's time. But once Stalin realized that the people were going to start maybe getting angry and maybe a new revolution could start, he decided to bring back religion to comfort them, because they certainly weren't going to get any more food. And the same thing is happening here. Moses the Raven is now back. In the middle of the summer, Moses the Raven suddenly reappeared on the farm after an absence of several years. He was quite unchanged, still did no work, and talked in the same strain as ever about Sugar Candy Mountain. He would perch on a stump, flap his black wings, and talk by the hour to anyone who would listen. "Up there, comrades," he would say solemnly, pointing to the sky with his large beak. "Up there, just on the other side of that dark cloud, you can see. There it lies, Sugar Candy Mountain, that happy country where we poor animals shall rest forever from our labours." Religion is convenient to Napoleon, and it was convenient to Stalin, because it's incredibly comforting to believe that if you're a good person, after death, you will get to go to a really nice place where all of your friends and family will be, where you'll have an abundance of everything that you could want, and you will live in happiness forever. They provide this hope for after death so that political leaders do not have to deliver on the promises of a better life for the average everyday person here. So the animals, maybe even though things are not that great here, even though I'm hungry all the time and all I do is work, when I die I get to go to Sugar Candy Mountain. So this is a parody of religion and an analysis of how religion is used to comfort and can be used to manipulate people on a large scale. That's not to say religion is necessarily a bad thing. I respect you if you have your own religion, but Orwell is making a criticism here of how religion can be used by fascist governments to sort of placate the population, to make them feel like, at least when I die, I'll get to go to heaven. Okay. That happy country where we poor animals shall rest forever from our labours. He even claimed to have been there on one of his higher flights, and to have seen the everlasting fields of clover and the linseed cake and the lumped sugar growing on the hedges. Many of the animals believed him. Their lives now, they reasoned, were hungry and laborious. Was it not right and just that a better world should exist somewhere else? A thing that was difficult to determine was the attitude of the pigs towards Moses. They all declared contemptuously that his stories about Sugar Candy Mountain were lies, yet they allowed him to remain on the farm, not working, with an allowance of a gill of beer a day. After his hoof had healed up, Boxer worked harder than ever. Indeed, all the animals worked like slaves that year. Apart from the regular work of the farm and the rebuilding of the windmill, there was the schoolhouse for the young pigs, which started in March. Sometimes the long hours on insufficient food was hard to bear, but Boxer never faltered. In nothing that he said he did was there any sign that his strength was not what it had been. It was only his appearance that was a little altered. His hide was less shiny than it had used to be, and his great haunches seemed to have shrunken. Okay, so what that means is that his coat is less shiny than it was, so, like his fur, I don't know where, his hair, his horse hair, is less shiny, so of course your hair is a good way to tell the health of an animal, and so the fact that his hair isn't as sort of shiny and thick and glossy as it used to be is a sign that he's not in the health he was. And his haunches, so that means sort of his back legs, his thighs, have sort of shrunken, so his muscles are not what they were. I mean, he's almost 12. He's getting to be quite an old horse. He's worked all his life, so this is very normal. What's not normal is what's about to happen. And his great haunches seem to have shrunken. The others said, "Boxer will pick up when the spring grass comes on." But the spring grass came, and Boxer grew no fatter. Sometimes on the slope leading to the top of the quarry, when he braced his muscles against the weight of some vast boulder, It seemed that nothing kept him on his feet except the will to continue. At such times his lips were seen to form the words, "I will work harder." He had no voice left. Once again Clover and Benjamin warned him to take care of his health, but Boxer paid no attention. His 12th birthday was approaching. He did not care what happened so long as a good store of stone was accumulated before he went on pension. Okay, that seems like a good place to stop. This is the first half of the lesson, and I'm going to film the second half in a minute.